and welcome to another episode of How to Avoid a Mr. H, Thick Skin. One of the things that, one of the ways my father was able to abuse me as a kid and even into adulthood was the argument of you don't have thick skin. It is so stereotypical of abusers to justify and continue their abuse upon their victims with the concept of their sensitivity and this feeling of, I'm not actually a bad person, you're a sensitive person. I'm not actually a mean person, you're a humorless person. Kind of making sure to not only throw it back at their victim, but to make their victim feel like the harm their victimizer is causing them, if it actually hurts them, is a character flaw. It wasn't that my father was calling me calling a child mean names and yelling at them and making sure not only that he was not going to provide for me, but that I couldn't provide for myself, which, I've explained before, kind of the sabotage of, I'm going to pay for your school, psych. That consistent, I really wanted Salvatore Ferragamo's actually kind of energy that he was always carrying. And what I see now in perspective as somebody who's trying to regain boundaries and social cues and acceptance that not everybody is going to like me, but I'm also not going to like everybody. I'm really working on not liking everybody. Is that if somebody says to you that you're too sensitive, then they're too hard for you. If somebody says that your skin is not thick enough, then you get your thin skin out of their way. You move out of their path because they should not be on yours. And I I think one of the things that I'm realizing as I start, manifesting healthier friendships, healthier career choices, healthier lifestyle choices, even healthier dynamics in terms of family, building one of my own and kind of reconciling where I stand with my actual family is this. I really want soft people. I think I'm meeting people that are really healthy and soft, and I'm starting to bond with people that don't have trauma, which I think is a sign of healing. Like before, a lot of my relationships were founded and started off of trauma, just our ability to laugh at how heartbroken we were. Because I was taught that humor, we hear it, laughter is the best medicine. The problem is we weren't sick. We were absolutely cut. We were stabbed. We were shot. We didn't have a cough. We had an amputation. Okay? We needed surgery, not Tylenol. And humor was used so often to veil bullying and to veil a lack of growth and immaturity from the surrounding adults. Like my dad. My dad he acted like he was 5, but he was 50. And it was this very strange kind of, you do realize you're bullying a kid. No, it's just that the kid cries a lot. And, people have asked me, well, why did your mother accept it? Because my mother could be bullying herself, and she was bullied. I think my mother was raised in a family that did not like her mom and kind of thought in some ways that they made her an exception. And it's something that I've learned a lot in reading about black sheeping and scapegoating, because my father made me the scapegoat for the other children that he did have contact with. And who knows if he had contact with all the kids. That's the big murder mystery I'm trying to figure out. But with all his kids. And I became, by age 4, this giant annoying villain. And I hated it, but now I see, what I'm trying to do now and taking accountability for my own life is also give accountability to others for their behaviors. Because I think often, in guru TikTok, guru YouTube, all these social media influencers that have decided to commodify peace and the process of making peace with yourself, one of the focal points they meet is like there's this concept of accountability, of just taking all the blame, and or taking centering yourself in your life in a way that you, which is positive and good, you take full control over your life, and you let go of thinking you can control others. And sometimes, I don't know if it's a matter of presentation, they kind of explain accountability as just you're 100% in charge. It's 100% your fault, no matter what, everything that happens to you. But that's a little bit murky, especially with abuse victims like myself, where it's this kind of, I was the child and this was my dad, or even if it's in terms of some past relationships that I entered with the trauma of my own child abuse, this kind of, I take accountability for believing in a liar, but I also acknowledge that he was a liar, right? I take accountability that I gave my money to a thief, but I also acknowledge that he stole. It's this weird balancing act of, I think a lot of my abuse was even hidden from me, or kind of, I was just so scolded and told to, scolded and told to accept abuse as normal and just my father, that I kind of I de-villainized him in order to accept it. I literally didn't say he was evil. I said he was lost. I didn't say he was a liar. I said he had problems remembering the truth. Right? And yet, this was a person that was always yelling at me that I was a liar, that by my nature I was malevolent. And I didn't have half of his crimes or half of his immorals. And yet, I was the bad guy. And I was told to and encouraged to not make him a bad guy. So I took on the role. I took on, or, well, I didn't take on the role, I took on the title just to avoid acknowledging that he had the role. And when I look at a lot of my relationships, it's not just me, it's almost like they're, it's a two for one deal. I have a real trouble acknowledging and accepting just how much evil I let into my life and how I'm paying the consequences even to this day. But I'm also, I feel sometimes scared or bad or guilty or cruel or confused to say that they were evil. So it's these two things of I need to take accountability for me, and I need to give them back their blame too. It's like we're all to blame. I blame me for accepting their bad behavior, but I acknowledge they were badly behaved. And I don't think we tell people both sides of that process, because it's really, I mean, if I'm taking accountability for falling in love and accepting and inviting people that were extremely dislikable and just judging myself for disliking them, I have to admit they're dislikable. I have to admit I date liars. I have to admit I date thieves. I have to admit I date con men. I have to admit I date frauds. And I have to admit I date them because I was my dad. And I have to admit he did those things. Despite the title, he was the role. And so much of that kind of inability to accept my role and to accept theirs comes from that concept of being thick skinned and being too sensitive, and kind of, that mentality, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, just call it chicken. I was really raised to believe that, and to believe that titling someone's behavior for what it is meaner than the actual behavior. Like my dad was a narcissist, but calling him that would have made him crumble, and he would have complained and cried and begged not to be called that. And then you would have to go through this process of lifting him up emotionally, And what I'm trying to accept is that I'm not too sensitive. And if I am too sensitive, in the same way my father always found a victim to love him, I can find a good person to love me and to love my sensitivities. Like in the same way my father, narcissists, I've said it before, they run on the concept of supply chain. They toss one victim out, get a new one. There's always somebody else that can fall for their lies. And if they wake up from them, maybe they could convince them to forgive them, like my father did often with my mom. And I think there's freedom in having such an evil father because, you know, yes, he committed crimes, but he also, I've mentioned this before, like, yes, he was a thief, but he also got rich. Yes, he was a fraud, but people really fell in love with his lies. Like, it's this weird thing of like, there is freedom to seeing evil succeed because good can succeed genuinely. I could get rich and get love and actually get those things by being myself, whereas my father never could. And that's why, in some ways, he was addicted to schemes, addicted to lying, addicted to hurting people, because there was this, the addicts run on this concept of rush. There's a rush to seeing someone believe your lies, but then you have to maintain them. And whenever they start to wake up from your haze, you get scared or you get annoyed. And then you have to either crush them with your lies or sweeten them with your lies. It's really hard to always be fake and performative. And the irony of my father is, I think his greatest dream was to be genuinely loved, yet he was never genuine. And I think in some ways, if I could get really deep in analyzing my dad, I don't think he wanted to be genuinely loved. I know, I feel like it's so weird with narcissists. I think there's this concept that narcissists, I think one of the things I'm trying to accept is people do what they want. I think my dad wanted to be a liar because he always lied. And I think he wanted to be loved, but he didn't love people. And he didn't want to work on himself to actually love them in a genuine way, which is why the lies were so enriching to him. I think he really loves lying. I mean, pathological liars, that's an actual disorder. That is a disease. And my father loved diseases. Like, he would be the first one to say, addiction is a disease. Don't judge me as I destroy you. And I think wrapping my brain around that my father enjoyed harming people, which is why he did it so much, is difficult because I'm not that way. And I have said it with my friends before, and I really am trying to like accept my own wisdom. If I can't understand evil, it probably means I'm not it. It's kind of like when you hear about like animal abuse or child abuse, like in my case, or you just hear of, this horrible murder. You're like, I can't understand that aspect of humanity. I can't understand the darker aspects of humanity. Thank God, because it means I'm not it. Like, I can't understand people that are violent. Great, means I'm not violent. And I'm saying that because, again, I need to acknowledge that I am a good person. And if there's one thing that abusers like my dad have the tendency to do, they either say you're too sensitive or they go with the alternative of you're too sensitive, which is you're not perfect. I do horrible things, but you're not that good. And it's kind of like there was just no comparison. My father was absolutely immoral. I was a good person that needed to learn better. And that was something he 100% adamantly wanted to block, both materially, emotionally, and mentally, and financially. And what I'm seeing now is I don't, again, it just goes back to that point of if I'm too sensitive for you, then you're too rough for me. And I will find somebody who's soft or softer than you and soft enough for me, and we will be happy. Goodbye. If I'm not, if you think nobody's perfect, you're right, but the point of love is to find people that are perfect for you, that are perfect with you. I'm not asking for a saint, but I'm certainly not asking for a sinner. And these are kind of the cues that you need to avoid a Mr. H. If he's bringing up topics of perfection and who's perfect and you're not perfect, get the fuck out of that relationship right now. Like, clearly, it is time to run. Because it's something that I talk about in my experience, admiration. One of the things that I marvel at in terms of, oh my God, I cursed, I'm sorry. One of the things I really marvel at in terms of my relationships is this kind of the heaviness. You don't think when you trauma bond with somebody, two things that I've noticed now in perspective, just because you trauma bond with somebody doesn't mean you've fallen in love. Like, just because you share the same paths and definitions of pain doesn't mean you share the same paths and definitions of love. And I grew up in a family that really believed love is suffering. Love is pain. You can't trust anybody 100%, especially with your heart, and yet they were in these long ass marriages and they were in these toxic romances for that very concept of nobody's going to be completely good to you, so don't be surprised when they're really bad to you. And I look at a lot of my past relationships and I marvel at how I thought they were lighthearted when they started off heavy and they ended up at best nothing. Like, really, like really heavy topics from the beginning, and just trauma. I went through this trauma. Me too. My dad is this. My dad. It's so funny because I knew I had daddy issues, but I didn't know the depths of my daddy issues until I started daddy recovery, and I realized that a lot of my relationships started with us discussing our parental issues and kind of their discrepancies and differences with their dad and their mom versus me discussing my discrepancies and differences with my own parents, and both of us trying to figure out if that's abuse or not, and feeling this shame that this is not only our story, but we still feel like we're little kids that need our parents' permission to say what we really feel and what we really think is happening to us, right? Even now when I do daddy recovery, there are moments where I just want to be, it's almost like I want to get a school slip and ask the teacher for permission for me to leave the class, to kind of, I'm just waiting for some authority figure to give me permission to take authority of my own life. And that is like, no, just one giant no. And I think that comes with when an adult is abusing a child, they forever put them in that kind of waiting for permission mentality. And I think the too sensitive, thick skin, you're not perfect, put me mentally. Having my dad be my abuser and having my dad say those things to me and having those things he said be the excuse for his abuse has put me mentally in this kind of wait mode, just waiting for somebody to teach me better, waiting for somebody to show up and love me in ways I don't love myself, waiting for somebody to say, I wasn't sensitive. He really wasn't abusive. He really was abusive. And that kind of mentality of kind of waiting to be saved, waiting to be approved, waiting to be validated is what lands you in trauma bonds that eventually land you in unlove. I have defined and lived my life according to pain and really thought I would get love. And that's why I'm trying to accept my supposed flaws, accept that I'm not perfect, but also accept that I'm good, and that people are evil like my dad. And that if I really want to avoid both people, I have to accept that I'm a good person that is getting better and thus deserves better. Period. Well, that's how you avoid a Mr. H. Congratulations. Check out daddyrecovery.com and check out Haideen on all music platforms. Gotta love ya.